I told myself it was just friendship, until the night she looked at me and said, "Don't pretend you don't feel the same way I do." The first time I really noticed her, it wasn't because of how she looked, though that would have been reason enough. It was the stillness she carried, the kind that makes you slow down without realizing why. Her name was Elena, and she owned the little book cafe I'd been hiding in for weeks. I went there to write, or at least that's what I told myself. But mostly I liked the silence, the low jazz humming through the speakers, and the way the place seemed to exist just outside of time. That evening, the rain started before sunset, soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the tall windows. Most people hurried out, clutching umbrellas and coats, but I stayed behind, pretending to focus on my notebook. She noticed, of course. She always did. When the clock neared closing time, I began to pack up, though I wasn't ready to leave. She came over, wiping her hands on a towel, and said with that half-smile of hers, "You can stay if you don't mind the company. I hate closing alone on nights like this." I nodded, maybe too quickly. She brewed tea, cinnamon, and something floral, and set a cup in front of me without asking how I took it. The gesture was simple, but it felt personal, the kind of small kindness that lingers. The cafe lights dimmed as she turned off the main switch, leaving only the warm amber glow from a few lamps near the counter. She moved with quiet certainty, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear as she talked about the storm and how it always reminded her of music, unpredictable, yet strangely soothing. I listened more than I spoke. Her voice had texture, calm, melodic, but edged with something lived in, something real. When she laughed, it was never too loud. It was the kind of sound that made you want to earn it again. At one point, lightning flickered through the window, lighting up her face for a heartbeat. She didn't flinch. She just looked at it, thoughtful, like she'd made peace with every kind of weather. I remember thinking she seemed untouchable, and yet there was a softness about her that drew me in. I tried to ask about the books she kept stacked behind the counter, old editions with her name scribbled on the inside covers. She smiled faintly. "Stories I once believed in," she said. "Now they just keep me company." Something about that line stayed with me. When I finally stood to leave, she was wiping down the last table near the window. I thanked her for the tea. She looked up, eyes meeting mine, steady, unreadable, and said quietly, "You always write about people who never say what they mean." I froze. It wasn't an accusation, more like recognition. And in that moment, as the rain softened outside and her words echoed between us, I realized she'd already seen through me, maybe before I'd even seen through myself. I started coming to the cafe more often after that night. At first, I convinced myself it was about routine, that the place helped me think, that the smell of coffee and old paper somehow sharpened my focus. But deep down, I knew the truth. It was her, the quiet pull of someone who made ordinary moments feel charged with meaning. Elena noticed, of course. She always noticed. One evening, when the last customer left, I stayed behind to finish a paragraph that didn't really matter. She walked over, folded her arms, and said, half teasing, "You write slower than anyone I've ever met." "I think too much before I type," I admitted. "That's not always a bad thing," she said softly, before pulling up a chair across from me. "Sometimes silence says what words can't." From then on, our after-hours talks became a quiet ritual. We'd sit in that dim cafe, lights low, jazz playing faintly from the corner speaker, and just talk. Not about anything extraordinary, just life. The kind of conversations that unfold when no one's rushing to fill the silence. She told me about growing up near the coast, how she missed the sound of waves, about how she opened the cafe after her marriage ended. Something steady, she called it. Her words were calm, but when she mentioned his name, her eyes dropped, and I caught the faint tremor in her hand as she lifted her teacup. I didn't pry. I just listened. And maybe that's why she kept talking. Sometimes, the things she said lingered long after I went home. "People think loneliness means being alone," she told me once. "But it's really just when no one notices the parts of you that you wish someone would." I remember staring at her then, the way her hair caught the light, how her voice lowered as though afraid to be overheard by the empty room. My throat felt tight, not from pity, but from recognition. Because I understood that feeling too well. A few nights later, as we were cleaning up, our hands brushed while reaching for the same mug. It wasn't planned, but neither of us moved away. Her skin was warm, steady, the kind of touch that felt grounding. For a split second, she looked up, eyes soft, expression unreadable. Then she pulled back, smiling faintly. Boundaries. Always there, invisible but undeniable. Still, something had shifted. When she locked the cafe door that night, she lingered by the counter. "You shouldn't make a habit of staying this late," she said. "Why not?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She hesitated, eyes on the floor, then on me. "Because sometimes we forget what belongs to us and what doesn't." There was no judgment in her tone, only self-protection. She turned off the final light and walked toward the back room. But just before she disappeared, she looked over her shoulder and said quietly, "Don't stay too long. You might forget this isn't your place." And as I stepped out into the cool night, the truth hit me. Maybe it already was. By the third week, the cafe no longer felt like a place I visited. It felt like a rhythm I'd fallen into. I knew the sound of her steps behind the counter, the soft scrape of her chair against the floor, even the faint hum she made when organizing the shelves. It was a small, unspoken comfort. That evening, the weather was clear, golden sunlight spilling through the windows as the day softened into dusk. I arrived early, hoping to find her before the evening crowd. She was behind the counter, sorting through receipts, a strand of hair tucked messily behind her ear. Her glasses were slipping down her nose, something I hadn't seen before, and I couldn't help but smile. As I set my notebook down, my eyes wandered to a framed photograph tucked between two old books on a side shelf. It showed a younger version of Elena, maybe in her 20s, standing on a pier, wind in her hair, smiling at someone just outside the frame. There was something raw and alive in that image, a joy untouched by the quiet restraint I'd grown used to seeing in her now. "Who took that?" I asked without thinking. She froze for a second, her expression unreadable. Then she turned the photo slightly toward the wall, her fingers brushing the frame. "Someone I used to wait for," she said softly. The way she said it, not bitter, not nostalgic, just honest, hit me harder than I expected. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. But for the rest of the evening, I found myself glancing at that photo, wondering what version of her that man had known, and what parts of her she no longer showed to anyone. Later that night, while I was writing, she came over to wipe a nearby table. A page from my notebook slipped loose and landed at her feet. Before I could grab it, she'd already picked it up. Her eyes scanned the page, the words I hadn't meant for anyone to read. I'd written about her. The way her voice softened when she said my name, how she laughed like someone remembering happiness rather than feeling it, how her hands spoke more truth than her words ever did. When she looked up, there was something different in her gaze, a kind of startled awareness, as if she'd stepped across a line she didn't mean to see. "You shouldn't write about me like that," she said quietly, her tone caught between caution and curiosity. I swallowed, heart pounding, then stopped being the story. I said before I could stop myself. Silence filled the space between us, heavy but alive. She didn't move, didn't look away. The only sound was the faint ticking of the wall clock, marking each second that stretched between us. Finally, she placed the paper back on the table, her fingertips lingering on the edge before pulling away. "Be careful with what you turn into words," she murmured. "Sometimes they stop being just words." Then she walked toward the back, leaving me staring at the page that had betrayed me, and wondering if she was warning me, or herself. The storm rolled in without warning, the kind that changes the air before it even arrives. By evening, clouds hung low, heavy with thunder, and the streets outside were already slick with the first drops of rain. Inside the cafe, the lights flickered once, then went out completely. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness and the soft rustle of her movement behind the counter. Then I heard her voice, calm, steady. "Don't move, I'll find the candles." I waited, listening to her footsteps. The match struck with a faint hiss, and then a small flame bloomed between us. The candlelight painted her face in soft amber, shadows catching the curve of her cheek and the faint silver in her hair. She looked untouchably human, like a secret the world had forgotten to keep. We gathered near one of the tables, the storm swelling outside. She lit another candle and smiled faintly. "Well," she said, "guess we're closed for the night." There was no music, no electricity, just rain and the rhythmic creak of the old ceiling fan slowing to a stop. The world had gone quiet enough that I could hear her breathing, and somewhere beneath that, my own pulse. We talked, not about writing or customers this time, but about everything that sits beneath small talk. She told me she hated how people assumed her life was complete, as if reaching a certain age meant the story was over. "It's strange," she said, staring at the candle flame. "People think peace means you've stopped wanting things. But peace can be lonely, too." Her words hung between us, fragile and real. I told her I was scared of wanting anything at all, because wanting meant risking, and I'd spent most of my life avoiding both. She smiled sadly, then leaned back in her chair. "You think too much," she said. "Sometimes you just feel." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged. A single drop of wax slid down the candle, pooling at its base. Outside, the thunder rolled again, soft and distant now. She reached for the lighter to relight another candle, her fingers brushing my wrist. The touch was accidental, and not. Her skin was warm, her pulse steady. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. In the flickering light, her eyes met mine. There was something searching there, something between curiosity and fear. I wanted to say something, anything to bridge the air between us. But the moment slipped. She exhaled softly and leaned forward, blowing out the candle. The flame disappeared, leaving only the scent of smoke and rain drifting through the open window. In the darkness, her voice came quietly. "Maybe that's enough for tonight." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. And as I stepped out into the rain, I couldn't shake the feeling that something between us had shifted. Not spoken, not defined, but undeniable. For a week, I didn't go back to the cafe. I told myself I was busy, deadlines, errands, a dozen excuses that didn't hold up under their own weight. The truth was simpler and harder. I didn't know how to face her after that night. Something had shifted between us, and I wasn't sure if crossing that invisible line again would ruin everything. Every evening, I found myself walking the long way home just to pass the cafe. The lights glowed softly through the windows, familiar and warm. Sometimes I'd see her silhouette moving behind the counter, graceful, steady, and I'd almost go in. Almost. But fear is a quiet thing. It convinces you that waiting is safer than wanting. When I finally did return, it was a cold morning. The rain had passed, but the air still carried its scent. Damp wood, wet pavement, something clean and new. She was arranging fresh flowers near the window when I walked in. Her expression didn't change much. A faint smile, polite, distant. "You disappeared," she said, voice calm but clipped. "I needed to think," I replied. She nodded once. "Thinking's good. Just don't let it become hiding." The words stung more than I expected. For the first time since we'd met, she didn't linger near my table. She stayed behind the counter, pouring coffee, rearranging mugs, asking customers about their day with a brightness that felt rehearsed. The air between us, once easy, now felt crowded with everything we weren't saying. I tried to start a conversation as I left, something light, something safe, but she didn't take the bait. Just a soft take care, her attention fixed on the espresso machine. It was like talking through glass. That night, I couldn't write a word. Every sentence I started fell apart halfway through. I kept seeing her expression, that careful composure people use when they're trying not to feel too much. The next morning, I went back. Not to fix anything, not yet, just to be near the sound of her voice again. The cafe was quiet, sunlight spilling across the floorboards. She glanced up as I entered, but didn't stop what she was doing. I sat at my usual table, unsure what I was waiting for. After a while, she walked past me to wipe down a table. The faint jingle of her bracelets brushed the silence. When she turned to leave, she paused, not looking at me directly, just at the empty chair across from mine. "I miss the noise you make when you think," she said softly. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an invitation. But it was enough, a small, fragile thread stretching between us again. I smiled, barely, and she saw it, though she pretended not to. And just like that, the distance didn't vanish, but it breathed. It became something we could both feel without breaking under it. The rain came back the night everything changed. It was late, near closing time, and the cafe was empty except for the two of us. The world outside blurred into streaks of water sliding down the windows, each drop catching the glow of the street lamps. Inside, the air was warm and still, the kind of quiet that hums with everything unsaid. Elena was wiping down the counter, her movements slower than usual. I offered to help, though I knew she'd protest. She gave a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes, and handed me a rag. "Fine," she said softly, "but don't make a mess trying to help." I started stacking chairs, pretending to focus on the work, but my attention kept drifting to her. The way the soft light touched her hair, the faint crease between her brows when she thought no one was looking, the gentleness in her hands, even when she was tired. We moved around each other in a rhythm that had become second nature. Quiet coordination, accidental closeness. Every time our shoulders brushed, it felt like a small spark, the kind that both warms and warns. When the last chair was upturned, I turned to her. She was standing by the window, staring out at the rain. For a moment, I just watched her, the outline of her figure against the glass, her reflection shimmering faintly in the dim light. "You ever get tired of pretending?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer right away, just kept looking outside, her arms folded. "Pretending what?" "That this," I gestured between us, "is just small talk and coincidence." Her breath caught. I heard it more than saw it. She turned then, eyes sharp and searching. "You think you know what this is?" she said, her voice low, trembling not with anger, but something more fragile. I didn't speak. I couldn't. She took a slow step closer. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't pretend you don't feel the same way I do." The words hit like a heartbeat, sudden, unstoppable, alive. Time seemed to slow. I could hear the rain, the faint tick of the clock, the sound of my own breathing. She stood inches away now, her eyes glistening, the strength in her voice trembling beneath emotion she'd tried so long to hide. I didn't reach for her at first. I just looked at her, really looked, and saw everything she'd been trying not to show. The quiet ache, the guarded hope, the fear of being foolish for wanting again. Then I stepped forward and took her hand. Gently, her fingers hesitated, then closed around mine. Warm, real. No words followed. They didn't need to. Her other hand rose slowly, resting against my chest. Not possessive, not uncertain, just there. Her forehead leaned against me, her breath soft against my shirt. We stood like that, the world narrowing to the steady rhythm between us, her heartbeat against mine, rain against the glass, silence that finally meant something. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I've spent years pretending I don't need anyone. Maybe I was just waiting for someone who'd notice anyway." I didn't answer. I just held her hand tighter. And for the first time, neither of us tried to explain the moment away. The rain had stopped by morning. The world outside the cafe felt freshly washed, the streets slick and glistening under the soft glow of sunrise. When I arrived, the front door was already unlocked. Inside, Elena was setting out cups, her sleeves rolled up, her hair tied loosely at the back. Unguarded, almost peaceful. For a moment, I stood by the door, just watching her. There was something different about her movements, slower, lighter, as if she no longer carried the same invisible weight she used to. When she finally noticed me, she didn't seem surprised, just smiled, quiet, genuine, the kind of smile that says you're meant to be here. "Morning," she said. "Morning," I echoed, stepping inside. The cafe smelled of fresh coffee and rain-soaked air. Light spilled through the windows, landing on the tables like soft gold. We moved around each other easily, without the nervous energy of before. I helped her open up, unstacking chairs, wiping down tables, small gestures that somehow felt like promises. Neither of us spoke about the night before. We didn't need to. The silence between us had changed. No longer tense, but full, comfortable. Every glance, every shared task carried quiet meaning. As we worked, she caught me watching her and raised an eyebrow. "You're gonna burn the coffee if you keep staring like that." I smiled. Maybe I just like the view. She laughed, a sound I'd missed more than I'd realized. "Careful," she teased softly. Flattery doesn't count as payment here. But her cheeks flushed faintly as she turned away, and I knew she didn't mind. We took our coffee to the window once the morning rush began to stir outside. People hurried past with umbrellas and briefcases, the city stretching awake again. Inside, time moved slower. She leaned back in her chair, hands wrapped around her cup. "I don't want promises," she said after a pause. "Not the kind people make because they're afraid to lose something." "I wasn't going to make any," I said quietly. "Just one, I'll keep showing up." Her eyes met mine then, steady and soft. "That's the only kind that matters." We sat there for a while longer, letting the morning fill in the words we didn't say. The cafe door opened occasionally, the bell chiming softly, but it felt like we were in a small world of our own, safe and real. Before the first customers arrived, she reached across the table, resting her hand lightly on my arm. The touch was brief, grounding, like a quiet acknowledgement that what had begun in silence had finally found its peace. As she stood to greet the day's first guest, I watched her move, calm, radiant, entirely herself. And in that moment, I understood something I'd never written before. Love doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it lingers quietly in the spaces between words, in the shared stillness of morning light, where two hearts stop pretending and simply exist together.